Hello again, and thank you everyone for joining. Welcome to this joint webinar of Checkpoint and Forrester. Today's webinar is about the 2019 cybersecurity prediction, and it's based on a Forrester report that has been done by our colleague here, Josh Zalonis. So in today's webinar, joining me, Mr. Josh Zalonis, a senior analyst of Forrester. Hi, Josh.
Hi, how are you doing?
I'm all right. Great to have you with us again, second year in a row. I'm very happy that this is becoming a tradition. Hope it will continue. Before we continue, please, can you give some introductory words about yourself?
Absolutely. So my name's Josh Zalonis. I'm an analyst at Forrester. I've been here about 2.5 years. My primary coverage areas are threat intelligence, vulnerability management, incident response. So you can imagine that there's quite a bit of overlap with the predictions reports, such as this. So, Tal, I think we might be ready to start.
Yes, we are ready to start. A few words about myself. My name is Tal Eisner. I'm doing threat prevention, product marketing at Checkpoint Software Technologies. I'm in the business of security and fraud management and analytics for the past 19 years, since the year 2000. And I'm very, very happy to host this webinar today along with my colleague Josh. I think the 20 cybersecurity predictions is a very popular topic, and Josh's annual report about the predictions of what's coming up in this field is both interesting but also very, very important. Our customers and the cybersecurity community is very interested in such. In today's session, we've decided to do this in the form of a chat, kind of a fireside chat between Josh, who will lead this discussion, presenting what he found in his report, and myself, and later on bringing the Checkpoint perspective about the insights and about how do we deal or help our customers deal with some of these threats that Josh and Forrester are presenting. So we decided that we're going to start by presenting the key takeaways for 2019 as Josh saw them in his research and report. So I'm moving on to handing over to Josh. Josh, what have you discovered?
So it's very interesting. Web vulnerabilities overtook standard vulnerabilities for exploitation by external attackers in this last year. And we're going to dig into that a little bit more, but it's interesting to go back and look at some of these vulnerabilities that are so popular with getting through our development processes, or actually going back to the OWASP 2003 top 10. So we're looking forward to talking about that. And we have the insider threat angle, which is also very interesting. There's a lot of opportunities and a lot of situations where external attacks could very well, or insider threats, I should say, look like external attacks. And it's getting harder and harder to tell the difference. Then finally, mobile malware is very exciting. We've been seeing a move toward the IoT paradigm with our mobile devices, but the fact that we're all carrying around these devices that do processing, it's essentially portable processing, and we're seeing some very sophisticated attacks coming out of 2018. So I'm not going to say I'm looking forward to seeing what we see next year, but I'm certainly concerned.
Yeah, absolutely. So web vulnerabilities, as you said, primary attack method. This is something that I think is a growing concern to all of our organizations that are trying to protect themselves. And as you said, we will dig in or deep dive to each and every one of the takeaways later on. But as most of us are always connected with some device or another, with a mobile, smartphone, or a tablet, or a laptop, and we're always connected. This is becoming a big threat to organizations. Of course, the inside threat, threat or the third party, or to put it, I think shortly, the human factor that continues to become a big soft touch or a soft area that can be very vulnerable to or threatening to an organization is also very, very interesting to hear about. And last but not least, some that we see more and more around the world, the mobile threat, the mobile threats and mobile malwares that have become a major concern, and as you predict, will definitely continue to be so. So let's drill down, Josh, to your report and see what more or in what more details each and every one of the pillars that you've described. Moving on to you.
Great. So I'm going to start with I guess a little bit of information about the process that I go through whenever I'm developing this content. And Forrester has an annual report where we survey network security decision makers to understand what their breach scenario was in the past year, like to determine things such as likelihood of a breach and whatnot. And from there, we cut it down, and I'll just drop a real quick number. We had a 55% of enterprise network security decision makers last year reported experiencing at least one breach. That's for the previous 12 months. Interestingly, 54% of those had internal attacks with malicious intent. But really the focus of what I'm looking at today is external attack, which was responsible for 41% of that. Now, the graphic that you see here, it's a second part to the question. It says, how was the external, you were attacked in the previous year. How was this attack carried out? And as you can see, the software vulnerabilities are a huge issue for us. And you may be familiar that even the Equifax report published yesterday and was talking specifically about this, the challenges that organizations have. So in going through this, this report, I've come up with the top 5 threats that I see as being relevant to us, and relevant in that in the last year, these were some of the biggest attacks that we were seeing. But second of all, what I try to do is project what the problem is that we're going to be seeing. So I'm going to start with this slide here. With web vulnerabilities being such an issue, I reached out to a number of the bug crowds and different other companies that are doing bug bounties in order to find out what types of vulnerabilities are making it through our software development process. And this is particularly interesting because you usually deploy a bug bounty using production code. And so it's at the very end of your life cycle. All the protections and everything that you've put into place in order to make sure that you don't have vulnerable code going out to the wild, this is what gets through. And interestingly, we have the top 2 methods of, or top 2 vulnerabilities submitted to BugCrowd last year were cross-site scripting reflected and stored. If you look at that, that's almost 22% of the total vulnerabilities that were submitted. What do you think about that, Tal?
That's a huge number. That's a very huge and very concerning number that you're showing here. And I think many of our customers or many large organizations should be interested in this area, the bug crowd and the vulnerabilities in and access also present for me a more general idea, as we said before, the issue of vulnerabilities in software and in applications and in other areas, which needs the attention of these security professionals.
Absolutely. And I want to point out that it isn't using the bug bounties to identify as a trend what types of vulnerabilities that we struggle with. I think that that's really one of the major value props of a bug bounty program, is to be going through and leveraging that extra level of protection once you have everything else kind of put into place, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely.
And here's the data points that I was mentioning earlier. If you look at I want to say it's the 2004 top 10 OWASP application vulnerabilities, the OWASP top 10 list. They actually showed what the top 10 was in 2003. So you can see that cross-site scripting has been a problem for 15 years.
So how come?
Go ahead.
No, you say that this is a problem that has lasted for over 15 years.
15 years.
Wow. Okay.
So part of the problem is that cross-site scripting, it's not as exciting as SQL injection. SQL injection, you exploit that, you are executing queries on somebody's database. Cross-site scripting, it allows you to interfere with the DOM and steal information from individual sessions, if you will. So it's a difference between a P1 and a P3 attack. And for this reason, I think that it hasn't gotten as much attention as it should. But if you think about it, this is a severe issue to have. Just as an example, one of the first things as a red teamer that you do whenever you find cross-site scripting is you go and you start trying to steal session cookies so that you can log in without credentials.
So again, there's a mixture, the way I see it here, the mixture between a failure or a bug or any way you want to call it, or anything that is failed on the software area, but there's still the human factor, with the password issue and stuff like this. And the combination between of them, as always, brings trouble to the security people and brings a threat to the organization.
Absolutely.
Interesting, very interesting.
So the next prediction that I have is a fun one. There was a demonstration at Black Hat this year where one organization was actually cooking eggs on a router that was running crypto mining software.
Yeah, I remember that.
So looking at that, they reported that they have their devices up to about 60 degrees Celsius. Actually, 60 degrees Celsius. Now that's an external temperature, and that's sufficient to go and cook eggs or beef or chicken or pretty much anything else that you want to do. But what is the long-term cost of running a device like this, and how does that impact your organization? I have two scenarios that I really like to bring forward. Now, one is that you're going to impact the lifespan of the device by running it this hot. The quality of the components, especially as you start getting into some of the cheaper IoT devices, and let's be honest, part of the reason why we have such a security issue with IoT devices is cost cutting. So if you're running a device this hot over a long period of time, it's going to impact your hardware refresh rates. Now,
So
the second thing that I like, oh, go ahead.
You say that this is a specific characteristic of the IoT device itself?
Well, it's a characteristic of really any device. But one of the challenges with IoT is that software vulnerabilities are hard to manage and maintain. Or the devices are hard to maintain. So one of the examples that recently there was a report about a particular vulnerability that was out, and it was in IoT cameras. Now, where do you put cameras? You put them on tops of poles and in the ceiling and all kinds of things. So if you have to manually upgrade these devices, what do you end up with?
Trouble.
You end up with your security team trying to shimmy up a pole. So, it's interesting because the other hidden cost, and this is probably a lot more influential, I guess, is that the amount of energy used in order to run these devices this hot, in order to do this crypto mining, the analysis was that it was costing about $2.88 a day to mine a few cents. And so with IoT and with crypto mining and crypto jacking in particular, what you run into is you're losing so much money by doing this that you have to, quote, outsource and leverage as large a farm as you can of these IoT devices. So, our ability to go through and maintain and manage our IoT devices is absolutely critical. And I think that the only way that we're going to be able to do that successfully in, moving forward is to drive the market ourselves. As our buyers go out and are selecting devices, we need to have it be a requirement that these are maintained and able to be have patch availability. Right? It's absolutely critical.
I see. Very critical at this point. Definitely.
So let's talk a little bit about credential theft. One of the big problems that we see is with credential stuffing. And credential stuffing is an interesting challenge to fix because what happens is an adversary will go and collect the usernames and passwords from a breached database and then leverage those usernames and passwords to try to authenticate to other sites than the breach site. Now, we all know that the first thing that happens when an organization realizes they've been breached is they reset the credentials.
Yes.
The problem is credential reuse and the fact that everybody else isn't forcing these credential changes themselves. So while this is a bit of a brute force attack trying to identify users who are reusing their credentials, it's not the brute force attack that we're used to or we were trained to be ready for, where after X number of failed logins that we would lock out a particular account. So it becomes a bot problem. It's a bot problem.
The bot problem. Oh, yeah. Now, do you consider credential theft more of a weakness in security or control, or is it a manner of failure? Well, failure is a tough word, but an issue of the employees and their use of credentials. We see a lot of cases where employees are using or are actually reusing their credential their corporate credentials in outside accounts, and this is causing a lot of problems. It caused credential theft. It caused phishing attacks. Where do you put the focus there? In a weakness of security, or a weakness of software, or a weakness, or I would say the human factor?
Well, it's really interesting because there's a specific example that I like to bring up with this regard, and that's the Dropbox breach. When Dropbox was breached, it was done so using administrator credentials from the LinkedIn breach.
Okay.
So think about that. Somebody was using, a sysadmin was using the same password at Dropbox for their corporate environment that they had for their LinkedIn account. Now, this is a failure of perhaps awareness, or perhaps it's just a failure of due diligence.
Gotcha.
Now, I'm going to argue that you need to move toward two-factor authentication, and in the end, we keep having our information compromised over and over and over. We don't have secrets. Knowledge-based authentication is going away, and I would argue that it's even becoming possible with the volume of data that's out there to go and start fingerprinting people's personal password generation algorithms. Now, if you think about it, you think about how you generate passwords. If you're not using a password manager that's using some type of cryptographic or pseudo-random number generator in order to go and generate these passwords, you're likely following the same style, if you will, of password. And this is your password generation algorithm. You're doing the same rotations of 3s or E's and, S is perhaps a $sign or something along those lines. And as you're going and doing this over time, the information is there to go and start understanding how you go about generating your passwords to begin with. So I think that presents a potentially scary opportunity in the future.
I see. Last point about credential theft, I think in my view, or in Checkpoint's view, what we see with today organizations that are shifting a lot of applications to cloud, a cloud-based application. I think that credential theft and phishing and everything in that area became even a bigger problem, because account hijacking and credential theft became a big issue for organizations that are trying to protect their data, but at the same time migrating a lot of that data, sensitive data, corporate data, to cloud-based applications. And this is where credential theft and account hijacking is becoming a major, major concern. Would you agree with this statement?
Oh, I absolutely agree. And I'd even go a little bit farther and say that because of the challenge of detecting the bot activity behind credential stuffing, then it becomes harder and harder to identify true insider threats. I'll give you an example from a recent report that a colleague of mine published, where in Ireland, Apple employees were being offered 20,000 euros for their credentials.
Wow.
We've also seen, yes, exactly. We've also seen instances, and this extends even to third-party risk, where we had Eric Lawrence, who's the author of the Fiddler proxy. He actually was talking on Twitter earlier this year about how he was offered back in 2012 $1 a user, or $1 per install, to borrow his product, with the assumption that somebody would be going and pushing a malicious update out.
Well, it's an industry. It's basically an industry of trafficking credentials.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it becomes harder and harder to see and to attribute these issues to being actual insiders, because of the difficulty of catching credential stuffing.
I understand. Interesting. Very interesting. Moving on.
But yeah, let's move on to they say that there's two certainties in life, death and taxes, but I'm going to add distributed denial of service to
it. So we're writing
2018.
three now. No, three. No, three realities.
Now there's three realities. The interesting thing about 2018 is you didn't hear as much about distributed denial of service, but actually we were seeing enterprises being attacked with DDoS at the same level as 2016 when we were seeing the Mirai botnet in its heyday taking down Dyn DNS and whatnot. So we're not getting the press around DDoS right now that we have been, but it is absolutely continuing to be a problem.
I see.
And one of the things that I try to instill in our clients is that this is one of those weird places where the person who's responsible for the attack isn't actually, likely has nothing against you. That a lot of these botnet operators, they're just mercenaries. They go and build and maintain these botnets and lease them out to people who really have it in for you. So the challenge here is that, it's not that I'm not in an industry or that, the people who are targeting me aren't, don't have these botnets. They do, because of the way that the botnet operators operate their business. That the thing is, the fact that this capability exists means that it's a risk to you.
Yeah. And this is was a problem, continues to become a problem, and looks like it's going to continue become a problem in the near future. So this should be well in the awareness of CISOs and other security people that are protecting organizations. Denial of service will continue to be a harmful or threatening vulnerability on their organization.
And it is really interesting, especially with the Memcache issues that came up this year, that Cloudflare, for instance, noted that they'd seen that the average attack size had increased 37%. Now, what Memcache does is it allows you to use UDP to cache data and then request it back. So if you find a series of Memcache servers around the internet and you start pushing large volumes of data to it, it just sits there waiting to be shipped back to you. The problem is, because we're using an unreliable protocol, that you can request it from wherever on the internet you want it, and all of a sudden they're going to have quite a bit of data coming down their pipes.
So Josh, just one question coming also from our audience. The percentages that you present in this slide, what do they stand for? The amount of denial of service or percentage of denials of service?
So this was of the vendors. Earlier in the presentation, I had a slide where I was showing what percentage of organizations had experienced external attacks from particular sources. So what this is a over time of that. And so you can see that, denial of service increased going back to 2014, 15, peaked at 16, dropped down a little bit, and right back where it was in 2016 for 2018.
I get it.
And I saw we had another question from the audience about what's being done to protect credentials. And I really, truly feel that it has to be a combination of something and something that you have. In fact, I was noteworthy earlier in the year that Google had actually moved to, and I want to say it was a YubiKey capability, that they hadn't experienced any issues with stolen credentials since they'd moved to that. And that, as well as I do, what the landscape the threat landscape looks like for that company. So I think I would highly recommend moving to a two-factor authentication wherever you can.
And also in the Checkpoint's perspective, Checkpoint believes all about prevention. We have different methods of, for example, preventing users or employees reusing their corporate credentials and simply blocking them from doing that or preventing them from doing that in outside accounts, for example, in Gmails or in bank accounts or whatever account you're using outside of the corporate account. If you are trying to access this account from your device, whether it's a laptop or a desktop, and you're trying to use the same credential, we have abilities and mechanism to prevent you, the employee, from doing that. This is one of the means in order to fight credential theft. And of course, we have some means to do it while you're using or doing credential usage of in accounts, in your cloud-based accounts. But I will not dive into Checkpoint products at this point of time. So let's please move on. And if we will have more questions, of course, we will be more than happy to get them. Now you're getting to a very favorite subject of mine, mobile.
And mobile had some very interesting attacks discovered. Actually, Checkpoint found one. I was hoping that you could talk about it a little bit for us.
Yeah, well, Checkpoint has done a lot of researches in terms of mobile malware, and I invite the audience to log into our blog, or not blog, on our Checkpoint Research blog and Checkpoint Research webpage to see some of them. But there's been very interesting research around mobile malware across 2017 and 2018. And we've seen many cases of interesting malware. And what you're predicting, Josh, is that mobile malware will definitely continue to grow and actually become terrifying.
One of my, and I say this a little tongue-in-cheek, one of my favorite published mobile malware research reports that I read in the last year was the one about RottenSys that Checkpoint published. Now, this was a situation where you had a application that was being shipped on phones. And the purpose of this, as far as any innocent user would be concerned, was that this was some software to go set up your Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
But the problem was it was actually calling back to C2 servers, command and control servers, and it was downloading updates for itself so that it could customize how it would execute on a particular user's device, depending on environment or anything else. And this level of sophistication is terrifying.
And
especially when you.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
No. Go ahead, please.
One of the scariest anecdotes about this is looking at how organizations leverage their MDM solutions, because that's really been one of the popular solutions to try to enable a mobile workforce and protect corporate assets and whatnot. But it's interesting that only 60% of employees are comfortable with their companies having that level of access to a device that they've bought and paid for. Right? This is my personal device. I don't want my company to be able to look at all the other things that I do on my free time.
Yeah.
And this is a large sentiment, a large portion of the employee base. Again, we've seen reports of up to 40% of employees refusing to install this type of software. And what happens is that as a business person, not as a security person, is you look at that and you say, okay, well, your security is not allowing these employees to access corporate resources from their mobile devices because they won't install the software. That has a tangible effect on productivity because employees who have a spare couple minutes are going to go check their email or do whatever it is that they need to do. And a lot of the time it's off hours. So this is free labor that you're giving up. And the problem is you need to figure out how to solve this problem in a way that's going to help protect the corporate assets while being palatable to our employees.
Indeed. And I think, this entire mobile area is something that we can do a webinar by itself about it. But I think that we're talking in a few slides from now, we have a slide that we're showing and discussing the fact that looking forward and actually looking at the present also, we see that the businesses today, the digital business, I would call it, I think you called it like this in the report, really presents a new kind of office environment around the world. An office that has no limits or no boundaries, and which means the perimeter boundaries have changed, and people and employees are using more and more mobile tablets and laptops outside of the perimeter. And there's also kind of a mixture in those devices between the personal and the business-wise. Everybody is using their phones, whether it's an Android or an iOS or an iPhone, to read emails, but 5 minutes later, as you said, they are logging into Facebook or watching their kids' pictures on it. And there's like a blur in the boundaries between the business and the private. And this, although it's great in the personal level, it opposes some kind of a challenge when you're trying to secure all that, because the employees are one of the main path of the hackers for the crown jewels, for the for the corporate assets, to the most vulnerable documents or most vulnerable and delicate data that they're after. So this entire mobile, you put it in a very interesting statement. Mobile malware is starting to get terrifying. I think the entire mobile domain is becoming terrifying to people who are in a need to protect their business.
Absolutely. This particular, the rotten sys malware that I was describing, that's the kind of sophistication that we were reading about 5 years ago in the APT1 report, right? I mean, this isn't just somebody going and putting a keylogger or some kind of spouse monitoring code on their phone. Like this is legitimate, sophisticated attacks with infrastructure and the ability to tailor what it's doing based on environment.
Indeed. I want us to move ahead because our time is also getting limited. Please continue. This is another representation of the vulnerabilities that mobile presents as a management problem.
One of the biggest problems with mobile is that a lot of it's device diversity is really what it is. What happens is a company will ship a new phone and it'll have all the latest code, and then it will stop being maintained as soon as they release the next phone. So what we're seeing is actually that over 50% of Android devices are running Marshmallow or an older version, which the Marshmallow was released in 2015.
Yeah.
So, and a lot of the time, if a user has one of these devices that isn't maintained by the manufacturer or by whoever they're supposed to be getting their updates from, the service provider or whatever, what happens is they check for updates and they get told that they're clean, that they have the latest updates, and they do as far as the service providers are concerned. But that doesn't mean they don't have known vulnerable code running on their devices. And so this is a problem that's going to continue.
Indeed, definitely. Okay, moving on to recommendations. Please, Josh.
So the top recommendation that I have is to embrace zero trust. The rethinking of corporate security and being able to go through and develop a data-centric approach where you're going and you're containing different asset clusters within your organization. Ensuring that you have vulnerability management solutions that provide endpoint visibility. Making sure that you have coverage against DDoS. And one of the most important things, I started by describing my coverage areas as including threat intelligence. I really feel that threat intelligence is the lifeblood of your security operations. And it's not just commercial feeds that you're subscribing to, but it's the way that you take information that you're learning about within your organization, the internal intelligence, and you're distributing it. And you're using intelligence as a language to describe risk, so that whenever you, as a security professional, are talking to somebody in operations, that you're not describing something by what its CVSS score is, but you can actually explain what the threat is and why this needs to be handled immediately.
Absolutely.
So those are really my top 3 recommendations.
Can you give a short explanation for our audience about zero trust? I mean, what do you call or what do you define as zero trust?
So zero trust is a data-centric approach where you identify segments of your network that you can segment out of your network. And so what happens is, instead of having, it's the classic statement, a crunchy outside and a soft and chewy inside, that you actually segment and honeycomb your infrastructure with specific monitoring of the traffic that goes between these segments in order to be able to improve your ability to detect and contain threats.
I see. So it's interesting, those 3 points, the verification of actually protecting any assets, any IT assets, in a place where the location is really, unlike the past, is really has no meaning. We discussed the digital office and how people are working more outside of the perimeter and needs to be controlled and secured there. It means also securing the users, but not the users, also the devices and the channels and the hosting models. And as you say, continuously log and inspect all traffic, both internal and external, or if I put it in my words, more holistic approach of looking at all the traffic that is coming and going and getting more and more visibility. You know that Josh, you already know this, but and some of our audience know this, but Checkpoint has been discussing the 5th generation of cybersecurity for a long time now. We believe that we started, in the 90s, where in the 1st generation of cybersecurity with viruses, and then moved on to network that has been more and more developed up to this point of time where we are facing mega attacks and polymorphic attacks that coming and changing themselves, what we describe as the 5th generation of cybersecurity. Interesting enough, talking about reports, is that we found that enterprises, believe it or not, in terms of security, most of us or most of the organizations are really between the second or third generation of security. And this impacts a lot. This was a research that we've done in the research department of Checkpoint, along with a market research with an external company called Dimensional Research. Found that, as I said, only 3% of IT security professionals are really protected towards these Generation 5 attacks. And it also has a lot to do with what you described as the attacks becoming more sophisticated. We believed and saw that over 76% of the answers we got experience attack in multiple vectors, more than one vector, which means on-premise, data centers, mobile, IoT, things that you have very well defined. So in terms of the Checkpoint perspective of how do we actually protect, we always discuss, first of all, real-time prevention technologies, which really controls all the IT assets. And this goes very much together with what you said, having an holistic approach of looking at all the assets, no matter where they are, if they are inside the perimeter and much outside of the perimeter, with endpoint, laptops, tablets, mobile, and also cloud. We believe that a shared threat intelligence really brings the best security technologies, and a consolidated management of all that is really essential in order to protect that. This is the Checkpoint approach for threat prevention across the entire enterprise. As you can see, Threat Cloud, which is our shared threat intelligence, is in the middle because it feeds all of the protections that we do, no matter where you are, inside or outside of the perimeter. And again, this goes along with some of the recommendations that you gave in terms of data-based data-based security or zero trust with no connection to the location, connecting inside the perimeters or outside of the perimeters, connecting mobile, connecting endpoint, and connecting cloud. I added the cloud because you also discussed about the hosting of data that is also essential to protect. I'm not going to drill down to the protections that we are doing, and this is not a product presentation, but in terms of endpoint, which you described, which is very, very important part of the puzzle, I would say, that visibility for endpoint is important. So we believe that endpoint protection is much more than, of course, an antivirus like it used to be in the past. We have different layers from mobile threat defense to advanced threat prevention within the endpoint with all sorts of protections. Again, I will not get deep diving to all of that, but we have different protections around that, including endpoint detection and response and EDR. And as I said, a mobile threat defense, which is an acute principal part of our protection. Also, the principles that we believe, as I said, in terms of endpoint and mobile, lies on prevention. First of all, this is the Checkpoint ethos, and this is what we convey and what we practice. Prevention first, and also practical prevention with high accuracy, which is enriched by artificial intelligence engines, focusing also on remediation, automated forensic analysis, a complete endpoint security solution. And last but not least, and this is relevant to what we've said, this is part of an holistic approach, part of the integral part of the Checkpoint Infinity architecture, which is an architecture that deals with all the IT assets: cloud, mobile, endpoint, and network. Intelligence sharing across all of that all the time. So it means that if something is discovered someplace, it immediately translates to controls that are distributed to all the parts of the security. In terms of the mobile threats that we see around the world, as you say, as you mentioned in your part of about mobile, we invest a lot in research, and we've seen that very interesting facts regarding mobile and how the mobile world is changing. We see that 90% of cyber attacks actually begins with phishing, which is a very interesting point. We believe that prevention and not detection is what will win this war. And we also believe and saw that 63 of all web traffic comes from mobile. You said in the beginning of your presentation that the web interface is the most dangerous or vulnerable surface of them all. And we see a reinforcement of that by the need to protect your mobile, because 63% of all web traffic comes from mobile devices, a very large number. We have SandBlast Mobile, which is the leading threat defense solution to prevent the advanced mobile threats. And recently we've also launched SandBlast Mobile 3.0, which has developed a new and unique mobile security infrastructure, the first of its kind in the market, that provides you on-device network protection, allowing business really to stay ahead of new and unknown, I would say, fifth generation cyber attacks. We have also other features in this, which I will again not drill down to, but URL filtering and anti-bot is just part of them. Last but not least, a very important point that I would like to point out, which really goes a long way with what you said, is really the need for security beyond the perimeters, guarding the devices and securing the data, which has both or two hands, protecting laptop, tablets, and smartphones on one hand, but also the second hand, preventing targeted attacks on SaaS applications and cloud-based email on the second hand. Two factors that are protecting our organizations that are experiencing what you called in your great report, the new digital office. The new digital office and the challenges that it poses to security professionals that are dealing with this beyond the perimeters, beyond what is known as the custom, traditional security of the network. So the security beyond the perimeters has two hands, as I said. First hand is guarding those devices, and it doesn't matter if it's a laptop or a smartphone or a tablet. And the second one is preventing the targeted attacks that we believe that are also in a big growing concern, the cloud-based ones. Last but not least, you have described the need that threat intelligence will be a major or a central part of protections, and the Checkpoint, what we see as the biggest advantage or differentiator is what we describe as our call Threat Cloud, our own threat intelligence service with daily inputs from over 150K gateways around the world that really translate threat intelligence into actionable security. And this is where we use this all over our protection. I think that the threat intelligence is something that we consider to be a major and central part of the security platform. And what we proudly call our secret sauce, because Checkpoint has been in the area of cybersecurity for the past 25 years, which is a quarter of a century, dealing only with cybersecurity. This is our bread and butter. We invest a lot in innovation and new technologies, and our threat intelligence is not a feed we buy, is in-house developed and nurtured, and as I said, consists from daily inputs from over 150K security gateways around the world. So we see a lot of traffic. And we consider this to be one of the major or the central parts of the way we do security. This is what we have for today. I would like to thank Josh. Thank you, Josh, for this very insightful report, first of all, and very insightful session. I enjoyed it very much. I hope you did too.
Oh, I did. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. As I said, this has become a tradition. I would like to thank over the 500 people that attended. We had a huge turnaround, and I'm very happy about this. This recording of the session will be available for all the registrants, and including on our social media and the website of both Forrester and Checkpoint. Thank you everyone for contributing and sending your input. As I said, this session will be available in the upcoming day over your email. Thank you again, Josh and the Forrester guys. This has been really, really great. And have a great holiday time and great 2019, all of you. Thanks, Josh.
Thank you.
Take care.